my name is Kaitlenn Witzel, and this is the Tarleton Teacher Work Sample Presentation for Education 4690. We're going to start off with the planning that I did for this lesson and looking at my central focus. For this learning segment, I introduced the concept of fractions. The first lesson looked at teaching students what halves, fourths, and eighths looked like using shapes that had been pre-taught to them in lower grades, and then how to create those fractions themselves. Then we looked at recognizing what an equal and an unequal fraction or parts of a fraction looked like. And then the third lesson was a soft introduction to the concept of equal fractions. Here are the TEKs that I used for each lesson if you want to pause and take a look, along with the vocabulary. These TEKs built off of each other and were a part of our scripted curriculum that we are required to teach in order by the district. These are also my objectives. If you want to pause and take a look to read them over, I will give you a quick run through. These objectives are pulled from our curriculum. We use the Go Math curriculum. We are required to use those objectives that they give us. I did reformat some of them to meet the ABCD format that Tarleton prefers, but these were all very formal, non-authentic pre and post tests and scores that I'm required to meet by the district that had students complete word problems that went along with their textbook learning from the day. And then going into the actual teaching of these three lessons. Some of the strategies that I used, first we'll look at classroom management. We have a whole class star jar that provides students with the chance to earn stars for a whole class prize. I use these as motivation for, staying on task and positive behaviors and rewarding students who go above and beyond to help out their classmates, such as, letting them borrow supplies, helping them review something they might be struggling with. I also use call-outs such as zip it, lock it, put it in your pocket, and other phrases that have been pre-taught to the students, as well as a bell on our teacher desk that allows us to recall attention quickly when we come back from our turn and talks and other independent activities. We have pre-sharpened pencils in the classroom to stop interruptions, along with hand signals using numbers such as 1 to ask for a pencil, 2 for the restroom, to help minimize distractions. I also use timers of both verbal and visual. When we move from task to task, I will line out the directions, tell them how much time they have, and then count backwards for them. Or if they're working on group or independent work, I'll give them a visual timer on the board so they can pace themselves and see how much time they have left. I prefer to use positive redirection, such as calling out students who are presenting the behavior I'm hoping for or looking for to get students who are off task back on track. And then I use Kagan structure-based grouping. I pair highs with medium highs, lows with medium lows, so that there's not too much of a achievement gap that causes unneeded struggle. I also use Kagan-based grouping, such as having, partners A and B, and then partners 1, 2, 3, and 4 to work with quick ways to group students, as well as ways to recollect supplies in a quick and organized way. For engagement strategies, I provide manipulatives for all of my students who have that as a 504 accommodation, as well as when we have struggles as a whole group to help make concepts in math more concrete. I differentiate all of my lessons for auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners. I provide things like a PowerPoint and timers to follow along with, auditory sounds such as our callbacks or having students read from our textbook, and then kinesthetic learners, I try to give them as many hand-on activities and manipulatives as the curriculum allows. I also provide reinforcement and enrichment for higher and lower achieving students. I make sure to have capstone activities for students who are overachieving or need a little more advanced work. And then as a whole group for that, I like to provide I and we statements that have to do with looking at things on a more concrete or different situational concepts, which I will get into more, but we read those I and we statements at the beginning of each lesson, which are just the objectives stated in a student-friendly way that go over the skills in a more meaningful context. And then I like to incorporate personal or real-world scenarios into my teaching as well. We looked at fractions, so I tried to have them look at ways that we use fraction in our day-to-day lives. Now, looking into the assessment and the data after teaching and analyzing those pre and post tests, as well as active monitoring results. The first pattern that I saw was looking at lesson number 1 when it came to identifying shapes cut into halves, fourths, and eighths. My students did great on that. They had gone over that concept in first grade. 18 out of 19 students on the pre-assessment scored meets or exceeded, and then on the post-test, 18 out of 19 still got 3 out of 3 of the questions correct, which was what they needed to meet that lesson 1 objective. And then on top of that, 8 out of 9 students got exceeds because they used fraction strategies to prove their parts, which was what I gave the criteria to being able to know more or get that exceeds level. My students did struggle with using fraction strategies to prove their work. A lot of students just either didn't care to, or they felt comfortable enough with this concept, which was a reteach from first grade, that they just thought they didn't need to use it. The second pattern that I found came from looking at dividing fractions into equal and unequal parts in my second lesson. They did a great job of connecting the importance of equal parts to real world situations. Every time I gave an informal turn and talk assessment where I walked around, there was great engagement in whole group, partner group, and then cold call questions talking about where we might use this to show that pattern of deeper understanding and personal connection to the content. We did struggle once again with actually drawing our model to expand this skill when faced with a word problem. Students on my pre-test did score 16 out of 18, getting that meets or exceeds, which was great. This was also another sort of reteach from first grade. And then on that post-test, 17 out of 18 scored meets or exceeds, getting that 75% or higher. But then only 7 out of 18 actually got the exceed by, using a model to explain their word problem and using our cube skills to circle and underline stuff in a model. Once again, I just need to start stressing that importance. I found on the second day, a lot of my students were also feeling very comfortable with fractions and not wanting to do the extra work of proving their question. And then pattern number 3 came from our struggle day, which was lesson number 3. That was that soft introduction to comparing fractions and looking at more/larger or smaller equal parts. My students really struggled with the word problems here. I felt like the curriculum really did a disservice to my students here. These word problems to look at an already struggle concept were very long worded, were multi-step problems, and it just kind of blew my students out of the water. During the lesson, I monitored and adjusted and added a lot more pre-drawn models to the content. And when we went over those as a whole group or in peers, the pre-drawn models really helped, especially when I gave them short word problems instead of wordy multi-step problems. But as soon as we got to that pre and post test, it just kind of fell apart. A lot of my students don't meet the required fluency in reading levels and vocabulary levels needed to even read the word problems that the curriculum had me use, so they were already lost there. And then those who did understand it were very confused on how to connect it to those models that we learned how to draw. For focus student number 1, it has SPED accommodations, but he is one of my highest achieving students. He scored exceeded on all pre and post tests. For his feedback, I wanted to really, really push that he needs to use those strategies. Even if he thinks he knows it, even if he knows it and he gets those good scores, I just made sure to let him know, we always have to double check to prove it. We always need to make sure we have that right. I had him, even though I could look at his paper and I saw he had the right answer and that he used the model correctly, I always asked him, how did he know it was right? Walk me through your model, just so I could get him to explain it to me in a verbal, different context. And then I also would give him specific praise on certain things he said during his explanation. I love how you showed which fraction has force by labeling the parts. Just really specific feedback to make him want to do that extra work of proving his answer. He also then used the feedback I gave him to assist other students who were struggling to use a model but understood the concept. I would pair them together using Rally Coach Kagan structures, and I taught him how to use the feedback of, oh, I see you have the right answer, but how do you know? And then he would walk them through the process of using a model, which helped him feel great about using a model. Focus student number 2 was one of my middle of the pack students. She seemed to really retain information from last year when it came to fractions, but she did not seem to know any of the strategies to prove her answers. After that first pre-test for test number 1, I really pushed on her to, hey, use that fraction. Look, remember we learned this, now show me how. And then I would praise her when she used those strategies unprompted. I also allowed her to help kind of mentor some of my lower achieving students and remind them to use those word problems as well. For formal assessments, I just made sure I kept proximity to her to check for her using those strategies, and when she did them, and when she did forget to use them, I would prompt her to remember to use them. And then focus student number 3, he has a lot of 504 accommodations, which I made sure to meet for these 3 lessons. I made sure to use the sandwich praise technique with him. For even just, following along, having whole body listening and learning, and then just even attempting those problems. He has a lot of one-on-one works. He receives multiple push-in and pull-outs a day as well. I also pull him on Fridays to pre-teach vocabulary and concepts, so he's more willing to, be a part of that whole group discussion in the upcoming week. I would constantly remind him to use his cubes and fraction strategies, and then he is a student who loves to draw. If he's not paying attention, it's because he's drawing on his workbook pages. So I really pushed him, saying, these models are drawing models. You're going to get to draw the fractions, and that really helped him engage and want to attempt to draw a model. Even if he wasn't doing it correctly, he was still trying to focus on what we were actually doing that day. Adjustments that I made while teaching. I initially did not have the I will and we will statement plans. I learned about those in a class actually before I taught lessons, and I thought this would be a great way to add those. These statements were usually they were always student-friendly language, but then they had something to do that brought up the level of blooms or made it more personal. Questions such as, statements such as, at the end of the lesson, I will be able to turn to my partner and tell them 5 fractions I see at home, or 5 ways I might use a fraction, just to make them a little more accountable for their learning, but then to give them those real world turn and talk connections was my second adjustment. And then 3, for that last lesson, while we were in the middle of the lesson, I saw that we were just not able to handle looking at fewer, larger, smaller, or less equal parts, especially those very long worded questions that did not provide them with pre-drawn models. So we went through multiple models together on the workbook questions, and I did not do a gradual release method. We stayed with whole group learning the entire time with some partner work. We just were not at a point where we were able to tackle those independently, which I think really did show on that post-assessment and pre-assessment, but this did help some of my students at least get practice with models. And then for the reflection on my personal development plan after looking at the data. As a whole class, we're going to continue to do our label and draw model fraction strategies and using cubes to, look at word problems both to do with fractions and further learning throughout the year. We're going to circle those important numbers and we're going to highlight those questions. And then I'm going to also be adding in more hands-on activities during CTBA review days to go over fractions, especially the equal to and less thans and comparisons. For focus student number 1, he's going to be able to complete a capstone project on fractions. He's going to be writing a report on where he sees fractions every day, and then he's going to create a presentation as well. And then he will be the leader of some of our small groups when we do math CTBA reviews to peer coach using that rally coach Kagan structure. Student number 2 will also be given the chance to grow leadership skills by mentoring peers using rally coach, and will be another one of my group leaders when we start reviewing fractions for the assessment. Student number 3 will continue to receive his 504 modifications for tests and small group polls to reinforce concepts, and then he will also be using pre-drawn models and letting some of my higher scoring students be his rally coach mentor, so he doesn't just get reteaching from me but from his peers as well. He's going to continue to receive that praise for attempts and active listening. Just seeing him participate is a good first step with him. He also gets to use some of his exemplars that he made himself with models that are proven correct while he tests. So instead of having a teacher example to guide him, he'll have his own example to guide him, to remind him he knows how to do it. He's just got to focus on it. I also completed the honors project as well. For the honors project for enrichment, I created a thing called Fraction Friends. Essentially, students would create a person out of shapes, and each of those shapes would be divided into fractions. They themselves would choose how many of the squares they shade in. So they might have a rectangle for the arm that's cut into fourths, and then they decide how many parts of it they shade in. Then it becomes cross-curricular. After creating and assembling their fraction friend and making those independent choices, they have to write about their fraction friend, including each of the body parts and each of the fractions they use. So if Sally made the arm eighths and then she filled in 2 of them, she would have to write the sentence, my fraction friend Paula has eighths as an arm. She has 2/8 of the arm filled in, and so forth. I thought this would be really good cross-curricular to get that writing into math, as well as raising up that Bloom's level to create. The extension, I found an online pizza parlor Google Docs that looks at word problems and true and false statements with comparing fractional modders for smaller or greater equal parts. I'm going to pull this as a small group poll, pairing my highs and my lows so there's a mix, and then we'll do a gradual release medal. I'll teach her model 3 of the pizzas, and then I'll have them do them as partners, and then I'll have them do them independently. I also get to keep those Google Slides so I can see who still needs to be repulled for another reteach. I had Dr. Putman look at this and review it for me. She identified my areas of strength being that I did a great job explaining the lessons and the students' performance. It was very clear and concise. She said I did a good job highlighting struggles that my students faced and then providing specific details for what their accommodations linguistically were. And then she enjoyed my fraction friend activity because it was cross-curricular and it looked at higher level thinking skills. For areas of growth, she said that I could add more specific examples to support why my students struggled so that I could better adjust and anticipate common misconceptions in the future. And then she also said that I could have provided more concrete examples of how I scaffold those linguistic accommodations for my 504 students. And then she gave me the great idea of creating new objectives for the enrichment and the reteach of the Google Slide activity in the fraction friend so that I could post those objectives and have that purpose to show admin as well as to show the students to keep their learning on track to understand why we are reviewing. Thank you so much.